All right, welcome to Seminole Sidelines. My name is Pat Burnham. I am joined today by Osceola editor Bob Ferrante. And Bob, we're 2 weeks out from the start of spring football practice, and we are on I believe, our third or fourth position group as we continue to preview Florida State's roster going into spring for 2023. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the running backs. And obviously, Bob, there's a lot to be excited about with the running back room. And that's saying a lot given the fact that you lost Trayshawn Ward to the transfer portal, who is now at Kansas State. But we're here to talk about the guys that are here. And, of course, it all starts with the number one running back in Florida State's running back room, Trey Benson, who came back. And there was some discussion about whether he would come back for another season. Took some time to decide and obviously decided to come back, which I think as we get into this, we both think that was probably a pretty good idea on his from his standpoint, considering how the NFL has not really placed a huge value on drafting running backs early. You know, they're looking for defensive ends, corners and safeties. And so, you know, probably a smart decision. And of course you got Lawrance Toafili, Rodney Hill, and, CJ Campbell. We'll get to see Caziah Holmes for the first time. And then a really big addition in Jaheim Bell. But just kind of your overall thoughts on the position as we start to look at spring 2023 and what's important and how it's going to translate to fall 2023.
A year at this time, we were thinking of Trey Benson and how much of a roll of the dice the coaching staff took on Trey coming off that knee injury. And then the first couple of practices, you watched him and you said, oh, that's not that much of a risk after all. This looks like a guy who can really not just run, but elusive, has the speed, has that body frame that you really desire. Again, I say this consistently. Coaches will say running backs come in all shapes and sizes. It's about keep that football, keep possession of it, have the vision, pass protection, run the ball with toughness and physicality. So I think Florida State has that good mix of different guys who each are productive in their own way. The only real knock on Trey Benson, honestly, is he does not catch the ball as well or as often as a Lawrance Toafili. He may not be that receiver out of the backfield that a Rodney Hill might be, for example, too. But I think we've done these position previews. You know, I've watched you and Fish do some, and you and Mark Salva. A really consistent and happy theme, I think, for Florida State is you've got that kind of clear-cut number one type coming back in all of these rooms. From there, it's just, okay, who's the other guy you can count on? Who's the most dependable number two, most dependable number three, and on the way down. The depth chart just looks and feels so much better going into spring than it has in past years for Mike Norvell.
Yeah, and listen, I think Trey, similar to Jared Verse, probably exceeded expectation in 2022. Kind of got off to a slow start. I can remember Mark and Fish and I talking several times about, boy, we really like to see Trey Benson get the ball. And, of course, as it turns out, he was a little bit beat up at the beginning of the season. And as he got healthier, started getting the ball more and finished with over 1,000 yards rushing and 9 touchdowns. And at times during the season, Bob was really hard, as hard to tackle as Cam Akers was his senior year. Different type of back. Cam's a little bit shiftier and got a little bit more lateral quickness, but obviously Trey plays with tremendous balance, and a healthier Trey Benson you would think would make for a more productive Trey Benson moving forward, and certainly gives FSU, I would think, one of the top running backs in the ACC heading into next year. And of course, as you said, one of the things that I think you'll see them working on is to get him more involved in the pass game, continue to work on his hands. But, certainly was huge for Florida State to get him back. As I said, I never really thought that he was going to go out anyway. I thought it was always smart for him to come back. The NFL does not place the value on a running back that it used to back in the 80s and 90s. You just don't, they know they can get good backs in the second and third rounds, if even later. And you see that all throughout every NFL roster, and just kind of how it has changed. And then, of course, you get back Lawrance Toafili, one of the most versatile players on Florida State's roster. Not only did he run for 448 yards last year on 93 carries, but also had 24 receptions for 268 yards. He kind of always reminds me, he's kind of slippery and He's a smallish Amp Lee to me. It's hard to get a solid hit on. An Amp was much bigger than Lawrence is. And of course, I think Lawrence is getting, will probably come in at over 200 pounds this year, at least by the time we get to the fall, which I think will be the first time he's been over 200 pounds. I know that's one of their goals is to put some weight on him. But, listen, just talk about what your thoughts are on Lawrence. It's hard to believe. I think Lawrence is going on his 4th year. Is that correct? At least his 3rd.
Yeah.
I can't keep up.
Yeah, I mean, Lawrence is another kind of cool story of perseverance and wanting to stick it out. I think he's had, maybe some opportunities to go elsewhere if he wanted to in the transfer portal, but he seems to be an FSU guy. And kind of, we do see those similarities. A really good receiver out of the backfield. He was always a football, basketball guy in high school. I think with a lot of those guys, they're not in the weight room year round because they're a 2-sport guy, which it's great to not specialize at the high school level. But what you sacrifice is you are not strength training, throughout those months leading up toward, say, spring ball, and then through the summer, and then, into August when you're back on the field. So I think Lawrence needs to put on those pounds so that he can be, frankly, a better between the tackles runner. He's not bad in that regard. It's just truly not a strength of what he brings to the table. I think what we see best from him is when Jordan Travis gets the ball to him in space, then he can look like a running back and try to juke a linebacker or a corner. Those kind of pseudo runs, whether it's, a quick pass into the flat, a screen, something like that, that's where Lawrance Toafili really shows his value. Like you said, you'd love to have Trayshawn Ward here. We all love the Trayshawn Ward story, the walk-on who, again, kind of rolled the dice on himself and wanted to come to Florida State. Made a great career for himself. I think all fans love him and wish him the best at K-State. I think now it's time for a lot of these guys to realize the opportunity is there because Mike Norvell puts a premium on that second back, on that third back. Who will it be? Will we see a lot of Jaheim Bell at tight end or running back? Will we see a lot of Lawrance Toafili at running back? Rodney Hill, who's been a fantastic practice player. I mean, we all love the way that kid practices. He has the mindset of a veteran. So there's just a lot of guys in that room. It's just a question, again, of where do the coaches think they best fit?
Yeah, and I think what we see out of Rodney is some of the same things we saw to Trayshawn. Plays the game extremely hard. Gives you everything he's got when he's got the ball in his hands. The way Trayshawn used to the style of play was similar to Jordan's, right? He was going to fight for every inch that he could get, and I think Rodney has showed glimpses of that. He carried the ball 27 times for 147 yards. My biggest question on Rodney coming into the program, of course, now it's one of the bad things about not getting to go out and evaluate all these guys as in person. It's all mostly done on huddle tape. I always had questions about Rodney's speed based off his tape. Then we saw him in person. He's a lot faster and a lot bigger than you thought he was on tape, and obviously runs very strongly. And so listen, Trayshawn's leaving has opened up a door for Rodney Hill. Listen, I think all the leading running backs had, I want to say Trayshawn had close to 90 carries. So you had Benson with 154, Lawrence with 93, and then you had he had 95. So listen, there's about 70 more carries out there for whoever the second or third team running back is this year, based on what Florida State did on offense last year. And certainly Rodney is a guy that looks like he's got some good hands out of the backfield. What we've seen in practice, he's a tough kid, can step up in pass protection. I think we'll see a bigger version of him in the spring and certainly in the fall. And then, of course, listen, we were impressed with C.J. Campbell, what we saw out of him. I think we're both excited about seeing what Caziah Holmes, the Penn State transfer, brings to the table. Listen, quite honestly, during the season, I did not pay a lot of attention to him in practice. There simply was no reason to, because he was a year away from playing. And most of the time he was over with the scout team going against the defense. And then, of course, what the guy everyone is talking about is Jaheim Bell, the South Carolina transfer, who carried the ball 73 times last year for the Gamecocks for 261 yards and 3 touchdowns, also caught 25 passes for 231 yards. What kind of surprised me is I did not realize that his number of rushes were going to exceed his number of catches by as much as they were when I started going back and doing the research. I thought it would be because they did not run him a lot the year before that. And I think what excites me the most about Bell's addition is what he can do to create issues for opposing defensive coordinators as far as personnel matchups. Because when you have a Bell and a Morlock in the game at the same time, are you lining up in 11 personnel with Jaheim at running back and Morlock at tight end? Or are you throwing Bell and Morlock in the game at the same time and along with one of the other running backs and lining up in 12 personnel? Or you could actually line up in 21 personnel, 2 backs, 1 tight end. I mean, so he creates all kind of mess matches, and then Toafili and Bell in the game at the same time. You could line up in 11 personnel, 1 tight end. I don't think we've ever seen Mike use 20 personnel, 2 backs, no tight ends, but you could do that with those 2 guys in the game. Obviously, you could also have those 2 guys in the game and line up in empty with them in the slot, or 1 at tight end and Toafili in the slot. So I think some of what Bell brings into, you can keep the same personnel, whether in 11 with him in the game, or you can line up in a 1 back 10 personnel setting. So how excited are you to see what they do with Bell this spring?
I think we saw a lot of that at Memphis. What Mike Norvell used, that kind of, flexible tight end, a guy who can block out of the backfield. He could be kind of a fullback. He could be an inline tight end. He could be flexed out. I think, you explain it. There are just so many different ways, and this guy truly is a mismatch. I'm not sure how a linebacker would fare trying to cover him. I'm not sure how well a safety would fare giving up that kind of body weight to try and cover him too. The other aspect that I've thought of is Florida State needs to run the ball better in short yardage situations, but also near the goal line. And that's a spot where they gave up some points. They went for it on 4th down because that's what Mike Norvell does. But he didn't always have the personnel to punch it through. You think through, what if you have Trey Benson, Jaheim Bell, maybe DJ Lundy? Maybe you get really, really jumbo down there because you just have to. It's about physicality and punching it in. You can't settle for 3. You've got to get 7 more often than not. I do wonder just how much, and using a Kyle Morlock too, using those big bodies. I do think it just gives Mike Norvell and Alex Atkins the whole offseason to creatively think about, okay, what can we do? Because the end goal is, hey, if it's 3rd and goal at the 1, at the half-yard line, we are getting that touchdown. How do we do it? And I think you can use that jump ball. They've tried that jump ball a lot. It's a great weapon with the height at receiver, but it's also great to have the big boys who can run it and block for a runner like a Trey Benson too.
Yeah. I just think it's fascinating what Bell and we'll get to tight ends later, obviously, but with Bell and Morlock in the game at the same time, what you can do in personnel groupings. It could be 11, it could be 12, it could be 21. I mean, it's just, and that creates a lot of structural issues for defenses because you got different responsibilities if they're 11 versus 12 versus 21 versus 22. We even think that with now I'm moving over into the tight ends because now I'm getting into 13 personnel. So we'll talk about that when we get to
some.
And I think we'll see more of it. And listen, I do think, and I just want to just get your thoughts on this. We saw an unbelievable rush offense from Florida State. Obviously, some of that has been the vast improvement they've made on the. And listen, before we move away from running backs, we haven't even talked about Jordan Travis running the ball. Of course, he ran for over 500 yards this past season. Do you expect? He ran the ball 82 times last year. Now we know all those were not planned runs, right? A lot of Jordan's natural instincts take over when the protection breaks down in the pass game. Do you see Jordan having a lesser role in the dedicated quarterback run game this year as opposed to what we've seen the previous 3 years?
The best thing about Florida State, bottom line, is they've put the supporting cast around Jordan Travis these last couple of years that he didn't really have in 2020. The supporting cast just gets better and better. I think he's running less because he has options. And to your point, he is running with his eyes up. to see a receiver or a tight end, the intention is to pass. I don't think his intent within this offense is to be a frequent runner. I think it's when all else fails and it breaks down, he has some pocket mobility too to elude pressure, but then that rollout and I can look downfield and find some really good receivers. I don't see this as being his thing. I think that would almost be him going backwards.
Yep.
What he said throughout the offseason, leading into the 2022 season, is I want to show everyone that I'm a passer. This is a very determined Jordan Travis. This is what he wants. This is what he envisions himself as a quarterback.
Yep.
And I think those conversations have been had, and Mike Norvell understands that. I think that's what Mike Norvell would want too. Would he want more of a passing but mobile quarterback and less of a, hey, let's run it quite frequently quarterback?
Well, I think what the additions to the roster, whether it's Bell, Morlock, and we can get even to the offensive line and receivers, I think what it does is it lessens your need to run Jordan. But when you do run him, he almost becomes more effective. He's more efficient, right? Because you've got so many weapons around him. We know Mike's going to use play action and misdirection, and we've seen it, showing counteraction, but running zone read, showing a counteraction one way and running zone read to the other. Mike's very creative in his play calling. We've seen that. I just think that the additions in the running back room, particularly having Benson and then adding Bell, will only enhance Jordan's ability to run the ball. I don't think you have to run him as much. And then I think the other thing, I think we'd all be in agreement, all of us here at the Osceola would be in agreement that we also think the running game could be improved, because I think they're going to take the next step with their offensive line. I think they are going to be better. We have not seen Casey Roddick or Keandre or any of the transfers in practice yet, but we've seen them on film from college. Jeremiah Byers being the other one. We've been very impressed with how they presented themselves when they've met with the media. It's hard to believe that Casey Roddick is not going to be a factor. But I do think that once again, whether you're a quarterback or running back, I think you got to be excited about the fact that it looks like Florida State is continuing to improve that offensive line, which should help these running backs in 2023.
Yeah, and they've been able to withstand some amount of injuries. I think the big ones were preseason. You lost Caden Lyles last year. You lost Bless Harris,
First game, yep.
Yeah, so and what they did was they found some adaptability along that line. I mean, there were probably times where Jazz Turrentine wasn't an ideal tackle. Maybe he was more of a guard, but he had to be pushed out into various situations. I think we've had this discussion. What is Robert Scott? Is Robert Scott a better guard or better tackle? But again, having this amount of depth and quality depth, experienced guys who have played various positions along the offensive line through the years, I think that only makes Florida State better up front, gives you some adaptability, gives Alex Atkins the chance to say, this guy's a guard, this guy's a tackle, this guy's a center. But what we've seen is consistently Mike Norvell wants to run the ball. That is the true, yes, Jordan Travis is the household name. I keep saying that. But the identity of what Mike Norvell wants to do, the identity is we're going to run the ball. We're going to wear you out as a defense. And then the fourth quarter, there's going to be a running back who hasn't run it already 15 times, and he's running some more. They've got guys who are fresh at running back. So this is the blueprint to wearing out the opponent, is just to mash it on the ground. I think that's the formula to win for Florida State.
Yeah, and listen, it's kind of interesting that Mike's a former receiver but loves to dominate with the run game. And listen, if we go back and look at his time at Memphis, he always played to his strengths, right? He had a great quarterback. He threw the ball. If he had a great running back that year, I think his third year there, they were 8th in the nation in rushing offense. I got a chance to see him play several times when they went up against UCF, where my brother was coaching at the time. So, he does play to his strengths. Now, obviously, I think the answer to this question is, who are we most looking forward to seeing in the run game? I think we all want to see what they do with Jaheim Bell. How much he's line up at tight end, how much he's line up in the slot, how much he's line up in the backfield. Outside of Jaheim Bell, who are you most excited about seeing in the spring? I think it's safe to say that Benson will have limited reps. I think they'll save the rest of them for most everybody else. I think they kind of know what they got in Trey. Really, they got what they got in Lawrence. And listen, I'm sure that they'll continue to add to Mike's offense with the additions of this new personnel. But outside of Jaheim, who are you looking forward to seeing the most heading into spring practice?
Caziah Holmes is a complete wild card. Like you said, he was on the scout team. We have no real clue what to expect from him. I think we're all very, very curious. But I think the guy with the upside is really a Rodney Hill. I do feel like Rodney Hill is a guy who could factor in the return game if he's not, in those, say, top 3 guys as far as the running back competition. He was really undersized, and they did make an effort to put some weight on him very, very early. I have to imagine from a pass protection standpoint, he's behind there compared to maybe some of the other guys.
Yep.
But how much has he caught on? How much is he very comfortable in a pass protection role? That's typically the deciding factor. A lot of coaches want to know that Jordan Travis is going to be protected as well as possible by that running back. So I think curious about Caziah, curious about Rodney Hill for sure too.
Now, are you more excited about, as these years gone by? I think since we rebranded the Osceola, I believe before the 2019 season, we've each fall we've gotten more progressively excited about what we're going to see in camp. Now, I was not around last spring. I was up in Atlanta working for that indoor pro football league. I didn't get a chance to go through spring. Are you more excited about this spring than you were last spring?
The spring of 2021 was tough on the eyes. I think we were up there watching a lot of those practices and going, how are they going to win a bunch of these games? Yes. And then 2022, you said, okay, we see what they liked in these transfers. We see why the coaching staff grabbed that guy. And it was that way at every position. I just think, Fish would say winning is why a lot of these guys are here. But I do think it's a fit. It's a culture. There is the winning element. It's Tallahassee. It's Florida State. Right. I do think this program really can sell itself, and Mike Norvell can sell it very easily because this is a program that he wants to take the next step each year into a program of prominence. Truly was a top 10 team coming out of 2022 and has a legitimate shot to unseat Clemson and maybe win an ACC title. I do think, again, we've had the conversation of how do you handle the prosperity? How do you go through the off season and still want to be personally motivated to work hard at 6 a.m. when Josh Storms is blowing the whistle? If you are that guy, if you're still motivated, then that's the kind of team you're going to get in September, October, November. I think we'll start to see that in the spring.
Well, Fish is right. Winning does help recruiting, and it helps the rich. It keeps the rich rich, right? We've seen we've seen Florida State have more success not only in the high school recruiting front, but also the transfer portal, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that they have gotten better each and every season. And as far as complacency, Mike does not strike me as the kind of guy that's going to handle complacency in that more athletic center very well. And listen, there's some pressure on this football team now. You've got a guy, you started a Heisman Trophy campaign for your quarterback. Whether people like it or not, NIL is a part of this. There's going to be things expected. We've seen one of Florida State's players come out and said, I made $150,000 last year. People are going to expect him to live up to that money that he's making. So I think the new ceiling has been set, right? The new standard has been set, 10 wins. That's what this fan base expects. I think the staff knows that. I think the players know that. I think you look at the schedule, and obviously, and we'll get more into that. We got a lot of time to talk about the 2023 schedule, and we really need to get these rosters to get set on because we got another transfer portal window to go through. So these rosters will look different post-spring than they do right now. I think we'll see changes throughout the country. But certainly, I think that, and we'll get into more of this in its totality, later. But there's, I think I don't think there'll be any room for. I don't think there'll be any complacency tolerated over in that building. I know they're working awful hard, and they're already in off season. Have been in off season conditioning, and listen. I think good times are ahead, and I think we're all excited. I know I'm excited because I didn't get to see spring practice last year, and as you know, I probably like to go to practices more than I like to go to games. I really do enjoy going to watching the coaches interact with the kids and watching the kids, take the next step and compete against each other. So practice is always fun for me, and even as a player, I like spring practice more than I like fall practice because you got to play football more. They roll out the ball, you scrimmage more, you go 11 on 11 more. So spring practice, I can't wait to get out there on March 6th and see where this program's going. And, of course, what also happens in March, Bob, or towards the end of February, I think March 1st, the NCAA calendar, are they able to contact recruits? It's not going to be a dead period. Kids can start coming back on campus. We are expecting to see a lot of traffic through Florida State. We talked to a number of kids at junior day, at the 3 junior days that we worked in January that are planning to be here March 6th and through April 15th during the spring game. We've seen a ton of offers that they're actually as they've gotten better, they've started to expand that recruiting footprint. We've seen them even this week offer 4 out-of-state kids. Elijah Rushing, the 3rd rated weak side defensive end in the country, 4-star recruit, 6'5", 220 out of Tucson, Arizona. He was offered yesterday. Over the weekend, Paki Fanua, 6'5", 260 offensive tackle out of California, the 45th rated offensive tackle, was offered by Florida State, as was strong safety linebacker Zachary Smith out of Red Oak, Texas. Ori Williams, offensive tackle out of San Marcos, Texas, the 38th best offensive tackle in the country. 6'8", 310 was offered by Florida State. We actually have stories written on all of these kids with evaluations. If you want to go to floridastate.rivals.com or theosceola.com, listen, you're going to love the Rushing kid when you see him. He's got some Florida ties. He's already been to Florida on an unofficial visit. His father played at Florida for Steve Spurrier back in the 90s. Now, my understanding is Florida is no longer on his list. I got some intel on that this morning from a buddy of mine that coaches high school football in Gainesville, that Florida's not in the mix. The kid has taken unofficial visits all over the country. So obviously he's opening up his recruitment nationally. So it'll be interesting to see if Florida State can indeed get in on Elijah Rushing. Obviously, Kenny Dillingham's going to make his spiel to try to keep him in state at Arizona State, as I'm sure Arizona will. Zachary Smith, the linebacker from Red Oak, Texas. If you happen to watch his highlights, if you go to floridastate.rivals.com or theosceola.com, he's listed as a strong safety, but he even talks about the fact that Coach Randy Shannon has been involved in his recruitment. I project him as a linebacker based on what we see there. Ori Williams, huge kid, 6'8", 310, was offered yesterday, San Marcos, Texas. If you take a look at his huddle highlights in our evaluation, best football is way ahead of him. He's been to Texas A&M several times. So can Florida State get him interested and get him on campus? Obviously, that'll be the key for all 4 of these kids. But anyway, plenty of new offers going out, plenty of information on the on our website. Be sure to check it out. But your thoughts on the difference in recruiting, Bob, from a year ago, and the excitement level that we're hearing from these kids, and the number of kids that we are hearing talk about come back to campus based off these junior days.
The quality of prospect is obviously coming here, but the excitement is evident. I mean, if you're just reading tea leaves in the comments of what they say and the body language, it's obvious. They like Florida State. They like the coaches, the assistant coaches, the analysts. This is a staff that likes to build relationships and was unfortunately forced to do it long distance, over playing video games, over text, over DM, until that prolonged dead period, ended in the summer of 2021. Now these are the guys that they've been able to go visit them and visit their high school coaches and guidance counselors, and they've been able to build relationships, seeing them in their schools, some of them in their homes too already. So I think it's just the strengthening of what this staff is that they're building those roots that they were not able to in the early days of their time here at Florida State. And yeah, it does help. As coaches always say, your players are your best recruiters.
Yep.
I think there's a lot of positivity within the program, and the culture does help. Jared Verse was able to spend time with a Jermaine Johnson and a Keir Thomas. And now a Jared Verse is able to recruit for somebody. And now a Cam Davis is able to recruit, and a Luke Kromenhawk and Camden Fryer. So all these guys being in place, I think, in that 2024 class is a much easier sell of come join me. We've got something special growing here. I do think that kind of early package of having guys committed, they didn't have this many commitments in that 2023 class, say February of last year. So now they are able to help sell what is coming, and I think that's going to very much help.
9 commitments right now. You would based on what we've seen, and we're just assume the number's 25. I mean, obviously at the end of the day, the 25 number is obsolete. It's about 85. No matter how you get there, there's no more limit on initials. It's just about being at 85. But they are at 9 commitments, which, based on what we've seen with Mike and the staff using the portal, we would assume 5 to 7 kids are going to come in the portal, and we'll get into that later. But, you could make the argument that from a high school perspective, they're about halfway done with this class. So the spots are limited. There's no doubt. And listen, we've already talked to a lot of these kids that are going to take official visits in the summer. And some are going to split it up between summer and fall. So I think we'll have a good idea of what this class is going to look like probably before we even get to fall camp. At least from a high school perspective, and then see what they do with the portal, obviously, once that window gets here. And, of course, now we'll see I would imagine that we'll see some action in the portal post-spring. I know personally, and we'll talk about this a little bit later on Friday because we're doing our linebacker preview on Friday, but, I think that's one spot that I would like to see them go attack in the portal, is trying to find somebody that's willing to come in here and either be a rotational linebacker, meaning he doesn't start but rotates in with the Loach and Tatum, or a guy that they bring in to actually compete for a starting position in the fall. But then I know you guys probably covered this last week, but I haven't had a chance to talk with you about it. And since we are in recruiting, NIL legislation went through in Florida. This really seemed to gather steam in Florida once Tennessee passed a rule where the university and the coaches could be directly involved in the negotiation of NIL type things. Just what does it mean? What are your thoughts on this NIL legislation? I know we're going to have some more coverage on this later in the week, but just what are your thoughts initially on NIL and what it does for the schools in the state of Florida?
I think just the ability to facilitate communication between coach, athletic director, athlete, sometimes a prospect, a high school or transfer portal prospect, and a business person who wants to arrange a deal for this prospect. This is all about just facilitating better communication. We saw coaches who on the Florida State staff, just because of the state law, they could not make a detailed presentation. They could not discuss deals, whereas football coaches, basketball coaches in other states could have a detailed PowerPoint of what they can do, of who they know, of what businesses are opportunities. So that disparity in the state legislation was a real limitation, not just for Florida State, but Florida, Miami, all the state schools. I think that's the one big thing that Mike Laufer has pushed for these last couple of years. And shout out to a lot of guys in the legislature who had a big impact there. Clay Ingram, who's on that 99 national championship team, was a former legislator who was, pounding the boots down at the legislative building, trying to make this thing a reality so that it was better for, again, Florida State, Florida, Miami, everybody else. So I think this is a good thing until we have federal uniform legislation, which I don't think we're going to see that anytime soon. This is the best scenario for Florida schools.
Yeah, listen, I think even it up with the other states. Obviously, you don't want to be at a competitive disadvantage in any area, and I think the NIL legislation, whether you're a fan of the NIL or not, at least it gives Florida State a chance to compete against some of the schools that, quite honestly, it could not compete against, or at least having to play catch up with because there was a third party involved, right? So now it's more a direct line of communication. So I think it's a game changer. I think it's going to be fascinating to see how the NIL and the one-time transfer portal rule affect college football over the coming years, and we can get into a bigger discussion on how it could actually affect the coaching around the country. Now you're managing NIL, free agency. Do some of these better young head coaches and coordinators say, well, hell, I can go to the NFL. We'll get into this. This is a whole other rabbit hole to go down. But how does that affect coaching in college football? It's going to be fascinating, as we said it was going to be. But yeah, I think for the Florida schools and Florida State, that was a big deal and a game changer in allowing them to compete with some schools or states that have like-minded rules. So it'll be fun. Now, listen, we got a lot to come later in the week, but if you have not read our quarterback, defensive end, defensive tackles, and running backs preview, they are online at FloridaStateRivals.com, FloridaState.rivals.com, and theosceola.com. We will have linebackers on Friday. Bob, we're doing receivers today, right? Receivers will be coming out later today.
Yes.
We will also have our video previews for defensive tackles and wide receivers coming up later in the week. So please look forward for those. This is our first live preview show. You will be able to, if you're not getting this live, this is a tape preview show. But anyway, we appreciate you joining us. We will be back on Friday, or at least somebody will be back on Friday. I'm not sure it'll be me or Bob, but it could be Ari or Kurt, Jerry, who knows, Fish, Mark Salva. But anyway, we appreciate you joining us for Seminole Sidelines as we take a look at FSU's 2023 running back room, as we are 2 weeks out from spring football starting, as Mike Norvell enters his fourth season in Tallahassee with huge expectations, and we are all looking forward to it. But if you have not gone to FloridaState.rivals.com, please give us a try. We have a lot of free content on there. We also have content on the Osceola YouTube channel that you can check out. All our video previews. We got baseball coverage, basketball coverage, softball coverage. We are all going in about 1 million different directions, but we think you will enjoy the content. But Bob, appreciate you joining me as always. And if you're a listener, viewer, please join us Friday for Seminole Sidelines at 12:30 p.m. Eastern. It's a great lunchtime show. Bob, have a great afternoon, and thanks for everybody for listening and watching.